The lunch rush at the Lantern House was settling into its rhythm when Kayla Briggs picked up the plate. She didn't hesitate. She carried it the way you carry something that doesn't matter: loose grip, casual stride, eyes already somewhere else. She walked to the trash bin, tipped the plate, and let the smothered pork chop slide into the garbage. The ceramic hit the metal like a bell. She looked back at the old black woman sitting at the corner table. Hands folded. Glass of sweet tea. Not moving. Kayla smiled at her coworker and said it loud enough for the room to hear, "You let one in and they think they own the place." She picked up Dorothy's sweet tea glass, held it to the light, set it down with a deliberate click. This tablecloth probably costs more than her whole outfit. Then she walked back, stood over the table, lowered her voice just enough to still carry. "You people always want to sit somewhere you don't belong, then act surprised when nobody wants you there." She straightened, smiled, the professional smile. "Take your trash and leave. You don't belong in a place like this." Dorothy Mae Washington was 72 years old. She did not flinch. She reached into her canvas bag and made one phone call. 11 minutes later, 3 black SUVs stopped outside that door, and every person in that restaurant stopped breathing. Stay right here. Drop your city and local time in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. What happens next will stay with you. Dorothy Mae Washington was born on a Tuesday morning in June of 1952 in a small house on East Gwinnett Street in Savannah, Georgia. The house had a tin roof that sang when it rained, and a front porch that leaned slightly to the left, and her mother used to say that porch had been leaning since before Dorothy was born, and would keep leaning long after all of them were gone. She was right about that. The house still stands, the porch still leans. Dorothy was the third of 5 children. Her father worked the docks. Her mother cleaned houses on the north side of the city. The big houses, the ones with columns and live oaks draped in Spanish moss and long driveways that made you feel small before you even reached the door. Dorothy grew up understanding the geography of that smallness. She understood which doors she was meant to use and which ones she was not. She understood it the way children understand gravity, not because someone explained it, but because the world demonstrated it every single day, without fail, without apology. She decided early that she would spend her life doing the opposite. She graduated from Beach High School in 1970, earned her teaching certificate from Savannah State in 1974, walked into a 4th grade classroom at Telfair Academy on a Monday morning in August of that year, and did not leave for 35 years. 35 years of reading groups and multiplication tables and science fairs and field trips and parent-teacher conferences and the particular, irreplaceable magic of watching a child understand something for the very first time. She retired in 2009. The school gave her a plaque and a cake and a standing ovation in the gymnasium. Half the parents in that gymnasium had been her students once. Some of them were crying. Dorothy did not cry. She thanked them, ate a piece of cake, and went home to her garden. She never stopped being a teacher. She just moved the classroom outside. She founded a literacy program at the public library on Bull Street in 2011. She ran it every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. She had 34 volunteers and a waiting list of children whose parents had heard about her and driven across the city to get their kids a spot. She was 72 years old, and she worked harder than people half her age, and she never once asked for recognition. That Tuesday in October, she had finished her library session at noon and walked up Bull Street toward the card shop on the corner. Her granddaughter Amara was turning 9 on Friday. Dorothy wanted a card with butterflies on it, because Amara had decided that butterfly sports were the most important thing in the world, and Dorothy took the preferences of 9-year-olds very seriously. She found the card. She paid $4.25 for it. She tucked it into her canvas tote bag beside her reading glasses and her small leather address book, and a paperback novel she had been carrying for 3 weeks without finishing. She stepped back out onto Bull Street, and the October sun hit her square in the face, and she stopped for a moment just to feel it. That was when she smelled the food, something warm and rich and savory drifting through the open door of the lantern house 20 feet ahead of her. Roasted herbs, something braised, the kind of smell that bypasses the brain entirely and goes straight to memory, to kitchens and Sunday afternoons, and the specific comfort of food made with care. Dorothy had been on her feet since 9 that morning. She was tired in that deep, quiet way that settles into the joints after a certain age. She looked at the restaurant. She had been inside twice before years ago for end-of-year lunches with her class, when the school still had a budget for that kind of thing. She remembered white tablecloths. She remembered the she-crab soup. She remembered her students sitting up straight because the tablecloths made them feel like the occasion required it. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was dim and cool after the October sun. Dark wood panels, brass light fixtures, white tablecloths, just as she remembered. A jazz quartet set up in the corner, though they weren't playing yet. The lunch crowd was present, but not overwhelming. Maybe half the tables occupied, maybe a little more. The smell was even better inside. Dorothy approached the host stand. Kayla Briggs was behind it, typing something on the reservation tablet. 29 years old, highlighted hair pulled back tight, the particular expression of someone who has decided, before looking up, what category the next person in line will fall into. She looked up. She saw Dorothy. The expression confirmed itself in less than 2 seconds. The canvas tote, the practical shoes, the simple cotton blouse, the 72-year-old black woman who had walked in off Bull Street without a reservation and without anyone expecting her. The customer service smile did not appear. "Can I help you?" "Yes, I'd like a table, please, just for one." "Do you have a reservation?" Dorothy looked around the dining room. 8 empty tables visible from where she stood. A Tuesday afternoon in October. "No, I don't. I was just passing by. The food smelled wonderful." Kayla glanced down at the tablet, then back up. The glance took half a second. The decision had already been made before the glance. "We have a 45-minute wait for walk-ins right now." Dorothy nodded slowly. "That's fine. I'll wait." "There's a bench by the entrance." Dorothy found the bench. She sat down. She set her canvas bag in her lap. She folded her hands on top of it. Outside the window, Bull Street moved through its Tuesday afternoon business. A delivery truck, a group of college students, a woman walking a very small dog with great dignity. Dorothy waited. She was good at waiting. She had been waiting her whole life. The difference was that she had always known with absolute certainty that what she was waiting for was worth it. She did not know yet that tonight she would remember this bench for the rest of her life. Not because of what happened on it, but because of what she decided sitting there before any of it began. She decided she was not leaving. The first 15 minutes passed without event. Dorothy sat on the bench and watched the dining room, the way she used to watch her classroom, before the bell rang, with patience, with attention, with the particular alertness of someone who has learned that the most important things happen in the small moments, the ones nobody else thinks to notice. A man in a gray business suit walked through the front door at 1:14 p.m. He was carrying a leather briefcase and talking on his phone. He did not stop talking on his phone when he reached the host stand. He held up one finger to Kayla, the universal gesture for "give me a moment," and then kept talking for another 30 seconds while Kayla stood there with her hands folded and her smile in place, waiting. When he finally lowered the phone, he said 2 words. Kayla nodded. She picked up a menu. She led him to a table by the window. A good table, the kind with natural light and a view of the street. He had not given his name. He had not been asked for a reservation. He had been seated in under 2 minutes. Dorothy watched. She said nothing. At 1:21 p.m., a young white couple came in wearing athletic clothes, matching running shoes, water bottles clipped to their bags, the slightly flushed look of people who had come from a workout and decided they deserved a real meal. They were laughing about something when they pushed through the door. Kayla looked up and the customer service smile appeared full wattage immediate. 2 for lunch. Yeah, do you need a reservation? Not at all, follow me. 4 minutes from door to seated. Window adjacent table. Menus placed with both hands. Dorothy watched. She said nothing. At 1:29 p.m., she stood up and walked back to the host stand. Excuse me. I've been waiting about 15 minutes. I just wanted to check on the table. Kayla looked up from the tablet. Something moved across her face, not quite irritation, not quite amusement. Something in between, the kind of expression that doesn't commit to either, so it can't be accused of either. We're still working on it, ma'am. I noticed 2 parties were seated after me. Those were reservations. Dorothy looked at the couple in the running shoes laughing by the window. The woman was already drinking a sparkling water. I see. She went back to the bench. It was at this point that Kayla turned to the young server restocking menus beside her, a girl named Brianna, 22, 2 months on the job, and said it quietly, but not quietly enough. She's still here. And Brianna looked over at Dorothy, and Kayla laughed short and flat and private, the way people laugh when they want you to know you're the joke, but they want deniability about it. Brianna did not laugh back. She looked down at the menus in her hands, but she didn't say anything either. Dorothy heard it. Every word. Every note of it. She did not look up from her hands. Tobias Green had been watching from across the room for the last 20 minutes. 22 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing the restaurant's standard black uniform with a white dish towel tucked into his apron strings. He was clearing a 4-top near the back when the laugh happened. He set down his tub. He looked at Dorothy on the bench. He looked at Kayla behind the stand. He felt something tighten across his chest that he recognized from a long time ago from being 12 years old and invisible in rooms that were supposed to include him. He walked to the back section of the restaurant where 2 empty tables sat clean and untouched. He checked the reservation book. Neither was marked. He pulled out a chair, straightened the silverware, and walked back to the entrance. Ma'am. Dorothy looked up. I have a table for you in the back. Follow me, please. Dorothy stood. She picked up her canvas bag. She followed Tobias through the dining room, past the tables of people who did not look up, past the jazz quartet, still setting up in the corner, to the small 2-top near the kitchen hallway. It was the worst table in the restaurant. It caught the draft every time the kitchen door swung open, and the noise level was higher, and the lighting was dimmer, and from it you could see nothing of the street or the room. Dorothy sat down like it was the best table in the house. Thank you, sweetheart. What's your name? Tobias. Thank you, Tobias. Sandra Perch appeared beside him 30 seconds later. Sandra was 44, restaurant manager, 12 years at the Lantern House, the kind of professional who had confused efficiency with cruelty so long ago that she could no longer tell the difference. She put her hand on Tobias's arm and steered him 2 steps away from the table. Her voice was low and precise. I did not authorize this seating. The table wasn't reserved. That's not the point. She's been waiting 40 minutes. Tobias. Sandra's grip tightened on his arm. I have you down for 4 closing shifts next week. Community college kids need those hours, don't they? So let's not make decisions above our pay grade. Tobias looked at her. He looked at Dorothy at the table, who was reading the menu with her reading glasses, on calm as a Sunday morning. He looked back at Sandra. He said nothing. He picked up his tub and walked back to the kitchen. Sandra straightened her jacket. She looked at Dorothy for a moment, The canvas bag hanging on the chair, the practical shoes, the cotton blouse. She made a calculation, then she walked away. Dorothy ran her finger down the menu carefully. She stopped at 2 items. When the server came, not Kayla, a quieter girl named Priya, who had been assigned the back section, she ordered without hesitation. "I'll have the she-crab soup and the smothered pork chop with grits, please. And sweet tea." Priya wrote it down. "Yes, ma'am." The food would take 14 minutes. Dorothy folded her hands and waited with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that patience is not the absence of feeling. It is the decision to feel everything and remain anyway. She did not know what was coming, but something in the room had already shifted the way air shifts before weather arrives. The food arrived at 1:47 p.m. Priya set it down with both hands, the she-crab soup in a wide, shallow bowl, cream-colored and fragrant with sherry and Old Bay. The smothered pork chop resting on a bed of stone-ground grits, pan gravy pooled around the edges, a sprig of fresh thyme laid across the top like a small, careful signature. It was beautiful food, the kind of food that asks you to slow down. Dorothy closed her eyes. She breathed in the steam. There was something in the smell of it, the pork, the gravy, the particular mineral warmth of the grits that reached back past the restaurant and past the bench and past the hour she had just spent being made to feel invisible. It reached all the way back to a kitchen on East Gwinnett Street in 1961, to her mother standing at the stove on a Sunday afternoon, in a yellow house dress, humming something without words, stirring something that smelled exactly like this. Dorothy opened her eyes. She picked up her spoon. She said a quiet grace, lips barely moving, eyes down. 12 words she had said before every meal since she was old enough to remember. Then she tasted the soup. It was very good. She ate slowly and with attention, the way she did everything. She worked through the soup first methodically, appreciatively, pausing occasionally to look at nothing in particular, with the expression of someone engaged in a private and pleasant conversation with a memory. At the table beside her, close enough that Dorothy could hear them without trying, a family of 3 was finishing their lunch. Mother, father, a small girl who looked about 6 years old, with 2 braids and a missing front tooth, and the boundless, indiscriminate curiosity of a child who has not yet learned which things she is supposed to ignore. The girl was staring at Dorothy, not rudely, not with the calculating assessment that adults deploy, just openly, the way children stare at things they find interesting, which is to say, everything. Dorothy glanced over, and the girl smiled immediately, the gap-toothed smile of someone who has been caught looking and does not mind at all. She raised her small hand and waved. Dorothy smiled back, waved once. The girl seemed enormously satisfied by this. Her mother noticed. She turned the girl gently by the shoulder, redirecting her attention to the remains of her lunch. She did not look at Dorothy. She did not look at Dorothy for the rest of the meal. Dorothy returned to her pork chop. She was halfway through it, the grits nearly gone, the gravy doing its work, when Sandra Perch appeared at the table. She did not come alone. She had Kayla with her. Kayla stood 1 step behind and to the left, hands clasped in front of her, with the expression of someone performing professionalism for an audience. "Ma'am, I'm going to need this table." Dorothy looked up from her plate. "I beg your pardon. We have a party coming in. I need this table back." Dorothy looked at the 2 empty tables on either side of her, both clean, both set, both unoccupied. She looked back at Sandra. "There are open tables right there." "Those are held for the party." "How large is the party?" Sandra paused for just a fraction of a second. 8. Dorothy looked at the 2 top tables beside her, each seated 2. A party of 8 would need to push 4 tables together at minimum. She said none of this. "I won't be much longer." I'd just like to finish my meal. Ma'am, I won't be much longer, Dorothy said again quietly, and returned to her pork chop. Sandra looked at Kayla. Something passed between them, a small private permission. Sandra walked away. Kayla stayed. She stood beside the table for a moment, looking at Dorothy the way you look at a problem you are about to solve. Then she crouched down slightly, bringing her face closer to Dorothy's level, and dropped her voice to the register of a confidence being shared. Let me be honest with you because I think it's kinder than pretending. Dorothy set her fork down. She looked at Kayla directly. This restaurant has a certain standard. Our regulars expect a certain experience when they walk through the door. That's not personal, that's just the reality of what this place is. A small pause. You came in off the street. You didn't have a reservation. And the way you're presented, it sends a certain message to the other guests. You understand what I'm saying? Dorothy understood exactly what she was saying. She had understood it the moment she walked through the door, perhaps even before. She had understood it on the bench, and she had understood it watching the businessman and the couple in running shoes, and she had understood it when Tobias's hours were threatened for the crime of treating her like a person. She understood all of it. She had always understood all of it. I would like to finish my meal, she said. Kayla straightened up. Something shifted in her face. The pretense of kindness dropped away cleanly, like a coat sliding off a shoulder. She reached down and picked up Dorothy's plate. Dorothy's hand moved toward it, an instinct, a reflex, the reaching of someone who cannot quite believe what is happening, even when they are watching it happen. Kayla pulled the plate away. She walked to the trash bin beside the service station, 8 feet from the table, in full view of the dining room, and tilted it. The pork chop slid off first, then the grits, the sprig of thyme last tumbling in after everything else like a small, absurd punctuation mark. The ceramic plate rang against the metal rim. Kayla set the plate on top of the bin. She turned around. The dining room had gone that particular quality of still not silent, because people were still chewing and swallowing, and the kitchen was still making its sounds, but still in the way that means every single person has stopped and is pretending not to have stopped. She looked at Dorothy. She smiled. Take your trash and leave. You don't belong in a place like this. Dorothy Mae Washington looked at the trash bin, at the remains of her lunch, at the sprig of thyme visible above the rim. She looked at her hands in her lap. She did not cry. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She sat with the absolute stillness of a woman who has survived every room that tried to make her disappear, and she began very quietly to think. And that was the most dangerous thing in the room. In the kitchen, Tobias Green heard the plate hit the bin. He knew the sound. He had been a busboy long enough to know every sound that dining room made, the particular scrape of a chair on hardwood, the different registers of glassware, the way a plate sounds when it is set down carefully versus when it is set down with intent. That sound was not an accident. That sound was a statement. He set down the stack of clean plates he was carrying. He set them down slowly, the way you move when something inside you has gone very quiet and very focused. He walked to the kitchen door and looked through the small square window. He saw the trash bin. He saw Dorothy at the corner table. He saw Kayla walking back toward the host stand, with her hands loose at her sides, and her chin slightly elevated, the posture of someone who has just completed a task. Tobias stepped back from the window. He sat down on the milk crate beside the prep station. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he stayed there for a long moment, breathing. He was 22 years old. He had grown up in Savannah on the west side, in a neighborhood where you learned early that the world had rooms for certain people and different rooms for others, and the distance between those rooms could feel like a continent. He had taken this job because it paid $13.40 an hour, and the closing shifts fit around his Tuesday and Thursday classes at Savannah Technical College, where he was studying hospitality management with the particular determination of someone who intends to run the kind of place that does not do what he had just watched happen. He did not go back out. Not yet. He could not yet trust what would come out of his mouth if he did. In the dining room, Renee Fontaine sat at the bar and stared at the glass in her hand. Renee was 38, a commercial real estate attorney, 12 years in Savannah after a decade in Atlanta. She came to the Lantern House on Tuesday lunches because the bar was quiet and the bartender knew her order, and she could work through emails in peace. She was 3 bar stools from the service station. She had watched the entire sequence from the first approach to the final line to the plate in the trash. She had watched it with the specific paralysis of someone who knows exactly what they are seeing and cannot locate the mechanism inside themselves that would make them stand up. She told herself it happened too fast. She told herself it wasn't her place. She told herself a lot of things that she knew in the part of herself she trusted least were not true. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked up her drink, set that down too. At the corner table, Dorothy reached into her canvas bag. She did not reach for her phone first. She reached for her small leather address book, the one she had carried since 1987, the cover worn soft as fabric, the pages dense with names and numbers written in her careful schoolteacher's hand. She opened it to the W section. She found the number she wanted. She had dialed it 10,000 times. She knew it by heart. But she looked at it anyway, in the address book, because some habits are about more than memory. Some habits are about intention. She closed the book. She put it back in her bag. She took out her phone. It rang twice. "Mama." James Washington's voice, deep alert, the voice he used when his phone showed her name, and it was not their usual Sunday evening call time. "Jimmy, baby." Her voice was steady. It was always steady. "I'm at the Lantern House on Bull Street. I thought you might want to have lunch with your mother." A brief silence. The kind that lasts less than a second, but contains a great deal. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, child." Another silence, shorter. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." She closed the phone. She placed it on the table beside the glass of sweet tea, the only thing left on her table, the only thing Kayla had not taken. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the trash bin 8 feet away. She looked at it for a long moment without expression, with the comprehensive calm of a woman who has decided that she has already given this situation everything it deserves and will not give it one thing more. Sandra appeared beside the table. She placed the check face down on the white tablecloth, a gesture designed to feel like discretion but functioning as dismissal. Then she leaned down, and her voice carried the precise temperature of someone who considers herself to be doing you a favor. "We don't need a scene. Just pay and go, and we'll forget this ever happened." As if Dorothy was this problem. As if Dorothy was the one who should be embarrassed. As if the appropriate response to having your lunch thrown in the trash in front of a full restaurant was to be grateful for the opportunity to leave quietly. Dorothy looked at the check. $54. $16 for the she-crab soup she had finished. $38 for the pork chop and grits currently resting in a trash bin 8 feet away. She opened her canvas bag. She counted out 3 $20 bills. She placed them on top of the check. She reached into the small interior pocket where she kept miscellaneous cash and found 6 singles. She placed those separately to the side, not on the check beside it, where it would be clear they were not part of the payment. That $6 was for Tobias, not for the service, for the decision. She set her reading glasses on top of her novel. She folded her hands. Outside the window, a city bus moved slowly up Bull Street. On its side, covering most of the rear panel, a campaign poster, a dark suit, an American flag pin, a face that this city had voted for twice by margins that made the opposition concede before midnight. Mayor James Washington, serving Savannah. Nobody in the restaurant looked out the window. Nobody was looking at anything except their plates and their phones, and the careful nowhere that people look when they want to be certain they haven't seen what they just saw. Nobody made the connection. Not yet. They came from the north end of Bull Street. 3 black SUVs, Savannah municipal plates moving in the kind of unhurried formation that communicates authority more effectively than speed ever could. Bull Street runs one-way southbound in that block, has for decades a fact known to every Savannah local, noted in every city traffic map, printed on the small green signs at each intersection. The SUVs came from the north anyway. Nobody flagged it. Nobody questioned it. When certain vehicles move with certain purpose, the architecture of the street rearranges itself around them. They slowed as they approached the Lantern House. They stopped in a perfect line directly in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, engines idling matte black against the October afternoon light. Inside the restaurant, the shift was immediate and physical. It moved through the room the way a change in air pressure moves through a space, not a sound, exactly, not a movement, but a collective reorientation. Forks paused between plate and mouth. Conversations dropped a register. The jazz quartet, just beginning their first set of the afternoon, played 3 more notes, and then the guitarist simply stopped, not because anyone told him to, but because the room had changed its frequency and the music no longer fit. People looked at the windows, at the 3 black vehicles sitting motionless outside. At the host stand, Kayla looked up, her brow furrowed slightly. City vehicles. She registered them as she registered most things as something that pertained to someone else. Then the front door of the lead SUV opened. Deputy Chief Anita Moss stepped out first. 51 years old, 26 years on the Savannah force, the last 4, as Deputy Chief of the Mayor's security detail. She wore a dark blazer and moved with the economy of someone for whom scanning a room is as automatic as breathing. She looked at the entrance of the Lantern House. She looked at the windows. She spoke 2 words into the earpiece at her collar. Then the rear door of the same SUV opened. Mayor James Washington stepped onto Bull Street, 48 years old, 6 feet 2 inches. Dark charcoal suit, white shirt, no tie. The American flag pin on his left lapel that he had worn every working day for 6 years. He was not a man who required a room to be told. He had entered it. Something about the way he occupied space communicated that information independently. He had the build of someone who had played college ball and never entirely stopped training, and the stillness of someone who had learned through years of public life that stillness reads louder than movement. He did not look at the restaurant sign. He did not look at the people already pressing toward the windows. He stood on Bull Street for exactly 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds he looked through the glass and found what he was looking for. His mother. Corner table. Near the kitchen hallway. Hands folded. 1 glass of sweet tea. No food. His jaw tightened once. Then he walked toward the entrance. Anita fell in beside him. 2 aides from the second SUV followed a young woman with a leather portfolio and a man carrying a tablet, both in dark suits, both moving with the practiced invisibility of people whose job is to be present without being noticed. James pushed through the front door. The October air rushed in with him, and then the door swung shut and the room sealed itself around the arrival. The jazz quartet did not resume playing. Sandra Perch stepped forward from behind the host stand, her customer service smile at full operational capacity, the one she reserved for what she privately categorized as high-value guests. She had recognized him by the second step. "Mayor Washington, welcome to the Lantern House. We're so honored." He didn't look at her. His eyes moved across the room past the bar, where Renee Fontaine sat frozen with her drink halfway to her mouth, past the tables of guests, who had all, without coordination, put down whatever was in their hands, past the window tables, and the jazz setup, and the gleaming bar. They stopped at the corner table near the kitchen hallway, at the old woman in the cotton blouse with her hands folded in her lap. He walked past Sandra without a word. The room watched him cross the dining room floor. Every step was audible. Not because he was heavy-footed, he wasn't, but because the room had gone so profoundly still that the ordinary sounds of movement became significant. A chair shifted as someone turned to follow him with their eyes. A glass was set down too carefully. Someone near the window exhaled slowly. Tobias Green had come out of the kitchen when he heard the SUVs. He stood in the doorway, now dish towel in his hands, watching. He recognized the mayor in the first second. He looked at Dorothy at the corner table. He looked back at the mayor moving through the dining room. Something inside his chest loosened, not completely, not yet, but enough. James reached the corner table. He stopped. He looked at his mother. He looked at the table, white cloth, one glass, a paid check weighted down with folded bills. No plate, no food, nothing else. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He placed both hands on the table. He looked at her face with the specific attention of a son looking at his mother for evidence of what she will not tell him. "Mama, hello, baby." Her voice was the same as it always was. Even, warm. The voice that had read to him every night until he was old enough to be embarrassed by it, and then missed it every night after that. "Where's your food?" Dorothy said nothing. She did not gesture. She did not point. She simply moved her eyes a single, small, deliberate movement toward the trash bin beside the service station 8 feet away. The plate was still visible above the rim. The pork chop, the grits, the sprig of thyme. James looked at the trash bin. He looked at it for a long time. When he turned back to face the room, his expression had not changed. It had compressed the way a storm compresses before it breaks everything, drawing inward and downward, gathering. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He turned to face the dining room. And the whole restaurant understood in that moment, with the particular clarity that arrives too late, what they had allowed to happen in this room. James Washington did not raise his voice. That was the first thing the room understood, that this was not going to be a scene in the way they had braced for. There would be no shouting. There would be no table struck with an open palm. There would be nothing that would allow anyone present to reframe what was happening as an overreaction, as a man losing his composure, as anything other than exactly what it was. He stood beside the corner table, hands loose at his sides, and he spoke at the volume of a man addressing a meeting. Calm, precise. The kind of voice that does not need to compete for attention because the room has already decided to give it everything. He looked at Sandra Perch. "You took a 72-year-old woman's food and threw it in the trash." Sandra opened her mouth. "Mayor Washington, there was a situation with the table. I'm not asking." He said it without heat, without emphasis, simply as a fact about what was happening. "I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm telling you what occurred in this room today so that everyone present understands what we are talking about." Sandra closed her mouth. "You threw a 72-year-old woman's food in the trash. In your dining room. In the middle of the lunch service. In front of every person sitting in these chairs." He paused. He let it sit in the room the way a teacher lets a correct answer sit before moving on, not for drama, but because some things require a moment to be fully received. "Now." He turned slightly, addressing the room as much as Sandra. "I want to tell you who this woman is. Not because it should matter. Not because the version of this story where it doesn't matter isn't the version I wish we were living in. But because I think this room needs to understand what it did today in every possible dimension." He looked around the dining room, at the tables of people who had not moved, at the couple by the window who had watched Kayla take the plate and said nothing, at the man at the far table who had looked away, at Renee Fontaine at the bar, both hands flat on the bar top, staring at the space in front of her. This is Dorothy Mae Washington. She is 72 years old. She was born in this city. She taught school in this city for 35 years, 4th grade Telfair Academy from 1974 to 2009. She taught the children of people sitting in this room right now. A woman near the window made a small sound. Not a word. Just a sound. She founded the Bull Street Literacy Program in 2011. She runs it every Tuesday and Thursday. Today she ran it from 9 in the morning until noon, and then she walked up Bull Street to buy a birthday card for her granddaughter, and then she came in here because she was tired and the food smelled good. He stopped. He looked at Sandra. His voice did not change. That is the whole story. That is the complete account of why she was sitting at that table. She was tired. She was hungry. She came in off the street, and someone in this room decided that was a reason to take her plate and put it in the trash and tell her she didn't belong here. The room was silent in the way that rooms are silent when no one is willing to be the first to make a sound. James reached into his jacket pocket. He took out his phone. He dialed a number. He did not move the phone away from the table. He set it down flat on speaker, where the whole room could hear it ring. It rang 3 times. Mayor Washington. Owen Marsh's voice coming from the phone on the white tablecloth, slightly compressed by the speaker. 63 years old, owner of the Lantern House for 11 years, currently on the back 9 of the Savannah Golf Club, where he spent most Tuesday afternoons. Owen. James's voice was the same, level, patient. I'm sitting in your restaurant right now. Your manager just threw my mother's food in the trash because she didn't look like the right kind of customer. I need you here. Silence on the line. The specific silence of someone doing very fast arithmetic about very large numbers. James, I had no idea. I know you didn't. That's part of what we're going to talk about. 9 minutes, Owen. He ended the call. He placed the phone back in his pocket. He looked at his aide, the young woman with the leather portfolio, and said 2 words quietly. The license. She opened the portfolio. She withdrew a single printed document and placed it on the table. James did not pick it up. He simply turned it so that Sandra could see it from where she stood. It was the Lantern House's city business operating license. At the top, a renewal notice stamped in blue pending approval. Due November 14th. 32 days from today. The approval signature line at the bottom was blank. Below the signature line, a single printed title. Office of the Mayor City of Savannah. Sandra looked at the document. She looked at it for a long time. The color left her face in the gradual, comprehensive way that color leaves a room when the lights are slowly dimmed, not all at once, but steadily, until the difference between before and after is absolute. Kayla was standing 6 feet away beside the host stand, and she had been standing there since James began speaking, and she had not moved because there was nowhere to move to and nothing to do with her hands, and the professional smile had long since ceased to be an available option. She was 29 years old, and she was looking at a mayor standing beside a corner table and a license renewal document, and an old black woman with her hands folded in her lap. And she was understanding with the full and terrible clarity of someone who can no longer pretend otherwise exactly what she had done. Her legs were not steady. She reached back and found the edge of the host stand with one hand. She held on. Outside, a car door closed, footsteps on the pavement. The front door of the Lantern House swung open, and Owen Marsh walked in red-faced and breathing hard, his golf shirt still on, having broken 3 traffic laws and 1 personal speed record getting here. He had made it in 8 minutes and 40 seconds. Owen Marsh was a man who had spent 11 years building a reputation. He had opened the Lantern House in 2013 with a $2.4 million renovation and a vision he described in every interview as elevated Southern hospitality. He had framed reviews on the wall near the entrance. He had a James Beard nomination that he mentioned within 4 minutes of meeting anyone in the industry. He had spent 11 years curating an atmosphere, a clientele, a feeling. And he had walked through his own front door in a golf shirt, with sweat on his collar, and terror in his eyes, and the full understanding that all of it was currently balanced on a very thin edge. He crossed the dining room floor toward the corner table. His hands were out slightly from his sides, the unconscious gesture of a man trying to demonstrate that he is not a threat, that he comes in peace, that he is deeply, profoundly, structurally sorry. Mayor Washington, Mrs. Washington, I am so deeply sorry. I had absolutely no idea that I want you to know that this is not what this restaurant is. This is not what I built. James let him finish. He waited with the patience of someone who has heard this speech before and knows exactly where it ends. Owen. Owen stopped. She didn't do this because she's cruel. James nodded toward Sandra, who was standing 6 feet away with the expression of someone watching their life rearrange itself into a shape they don't recognize. She did this because you built a room where cruelty feels like professionalism. She protected your brand. She protected your atmosphere. She made a judgment about who belonged in your restaurant and who didn't. And she acted on it. And she did it because everything you built told her that was the right call. Owen's mouth opened, closed. You don't get to be surprised, Owen. Surprise requires not knowing. You knew what kind of room this was. You built it that way. The aide set the tablet on the table beside the license document. On the screen, the Lantern House City operating license, the renewal due date highlighted in the corner. Owen looked at it. He looked at James. He looked at Dorothy, who had not spoken since James arrived, who had been sitting with her hands folded and her eyes moving through the room with the calm, comprehensive attention of a woman reading a text she has encountered before in different editions. Owen. James's voice was the same, level, patient, inexorable. I want you to understand something. I have the authority to table that renewal indefinitely. That is not a threat. That is a fact about the situation you are currently in. Owen nodded. A small, rapid movement. The nodding of a man who has decided that agreement is the only available direction. It was Kayla who broke first. She had been standing at the host stand for the entirety of this, holding the edge of the counter with one hand, and something had been building in her chest since the moment James began speaking. Something that was not quite guilt and not quite fear, but contained elements of both and something else underneath. Something raw and less nameable that had been accumulating since she had watched her own hands tip that plate into the trash and felt in the moment entirely justified. Please. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She stepped forward. Please. I have a son. He's 7. I'm doing this alone and I have rent. And I can't lose this job. I can't. Her voice broke on the last word. Not performed. Actually broke. The sound of someone who has reached the outer boundary of composure and cannot hold the line. The room was absolutely still. Dorothy raised her hand. It was a small hand. Thin-wristed, the skin fine and mapped with the particular topography of 72 years of living. She raised it the way you raise a hand in a classroom, simply without drama, with the quiet authority of someone who has been directing the attention of rooms for 35 years. The room obeyed, completely, immediately. Dorothy looked at Kayla. She looked at her for a long moment, the way she used to look at students who had done something they couldn't undo, not with anger, but with the full, clear-eyed attention of someone who intends to make sure the moment is genuinely understood before anyone moves past it. Sit down, child. Kayla sat. She found the chair behind the host stand, and she sat in it, and she put her hands in her lap, and she looked at Dorothy. "I was born in this city in 1952, Dorothy said. Her voice was unhurried. It filled the room without effort the way a teacher's voice fills a classroom, not through volume but through the quality of attention it demands. I grew up on East Gwinnett Street. I remember what Bull Street looked like when certain doors had signs on them. I remember which entrances I was permitted to use. I watched this city change. I was in classrooms when the children who grew up to change it were still learning to read." She paused. "I did not come in here today to make a point. I came in because I was tired and the food smelled good. I sat on that bench for 45 minutes and watched people seated ahead of me, and I said nothing because I wanted to believe I was wrong about what was happening. I was not wrong." She looked at Kayla directly. "You looked at me, and you saw something that needed to be removed. I have been removed from rooms before. I have been told I don't belong in places before. I will not pretend sitting here that it doesn't still hurt, because it does. It hurts the same way it hurt when I was 22, and it hurt when I was 40, and it hurts right now today at 72, and the fact that it still has the power to hurt is the most honest thing I can tell you." The little girl from the adjacent table, the one with 2 braids and the missing front tooth, the one who had waved, was crying quietly. Not dramatically, just the small, steady tears of a child who has felt something she doesn't have language for yet, but knows is important. Her mother did not turn her away. She put her arm around her daughter's shoulders and held her, and did not look away from Dorothy. "You are not a monster," Dorothy said to Kayla. "You are a person who made a monstrous decision. There is a difference. But that decision came from somewhere. And that somewhere is what needs to change in you and in this room and in every room like it." She looked at Owen. Her voice did not change. "Fix what you built." The room waited. It waited, the way rooms wait when something has just been said that cannot be unsaid, not with impatience but with the collective held breath of people who understand. They are present at a moment that will matter, that will be carried out of this restaurant, in every person who witnessed it, and will surface unexpectedly for years. Owen Marsh stood with his hands at his sides. He had stopped nodding. He was simply listening now in the way that people listen when they have run out of responses, and the only honest thing left to do is receive. James Washington sat across from his mother and watched her with an expression that was not readable from the outside, too many things present at once compressed into stillness. Pride was in there. Grief was in there. The particular complicated love of a child, watching a parent demonstrate again exactly who they are. Dorothy looked at James. "She keeps her job." James was quiet for a moment. "Mama, she keeps it." Dorothy's voice was final in the way that certain things are final, not because they are loud, but because they are complete. There is nothing to add to them. If she loses her job today, she goes home angry. She blames me for what happened to her. She becomes more afraid, more certain that people who look like me are the source of her problems. That is not justice. That is just the cycle continuing in a different direction. She looked at Kayla, who was sitting very still in the chair behind the host stand, hands in her lap, eyes on Dorothy with the expression of someone receiving something they do not feel they have earned. 30 days, Dorothy said. Every shift, every guest who walks through that door, you greet them the same way. You seat them the same way. You look at them and you see a person who came in because they were hungry or tired or celebrating something or just needed a place to sit. You do that for 30 days and you see what it does to you. And then you decide who you want to be. Kayla nodded. She was crying without sound, now the kind of crying that happens when punishment would actually be easier than what you are being offered, because punishment lets you be the aggrieved party, and mercy makes you face what you did with nowhere to hide. Dorothy turned to Owen. "There is one more thing I want from this room." Owen straightened. "Anything. In the entrance. Where your framed reviews are. I want a photograph." She reached into her canvas bag and withdrew her phone. She opened it to her photos and turned the screen toward Owen. A class photograph, 31 children arranged in 3 rows on gymnasium bleachers, all in their school clothes, all looking at the camera with varying degrees of cooperation. At the far left of the middle row, a young woman in a blue dress, 22 years old, with her whole career in front of her. "My first class, Telfair Academy, 1974. Those children grew up in this city. Their children grew up in this city. Some of their grandchildren are in this city right now." She lowered the phone. "When the next person walks in off Bull Street in flat shoes and a canvas bag, I want them to see that photograph before they see anything else. I want them to understand that the people who built this city look like every kind of person. And I want your staff to see it too every single day before they make decisions about who belongs here." Owen nodded. His voice, when it came, was quieter than it had been since he arrived. "I'll have it framed by Friday." "Good." Tobias stepped out of the kitchen doorway. He had been standing there since Part 8 began, dish towel still in his hands, watching. He walked to the corner table and he stopped, and he looked at Dorothy, and he said what he had been composing in his head since he sat on the milk crate and put his face in his hands. "Ma'am, I should have done more. I got you a table, but I should have. When Sandra came over, I should have stayed. I walked away because I was scared about my hours, and I've been thinking about that ever since, and I'm sorry." Dorothy looked at him. The warmth that came into her face was specific and unhurried, the particular warmth of a woman who has spent her life recognizing the moment when a young person chooses honesty over comfort. "You gave me a table when no one else would. You did that knowing what it would cost you. That was enough." She paused. That was more than enough. James had been watching Tobias since he stepped out of the kitchen. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a card, city seal, his name a direct line. He held it out. "What's your name?" "Tobias Green, sir." "What are you studying?" "Hospitality Management, Savannah Tech." James set the card on the table in front of Tobias. "The city runs a hospitality workforce development program. Paid apprenticeship, 12 months full benefits. They have 2 spots open in the January cohort. You call that number by Friday." Tobias looked at the card. He picked it up carefully, the way you pick up something you don't want to damage. "Yes, sir." Renee Fontaine got up from the bar. She walked across the dining room slowly, and when she reached the corner table, she stopped, and she looked at Dorothy and she said, "I watched it from the beginning. From when she told you the wait was 45 minutes and seated the man in the suit 2 minutes later. I watched all of it, and I didn't say a word because I didn't want to make a scene." Her voice broke on the last 3 words. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't have an excuse." Dorothy looked at her for a long moment. "Making a scene," she said, "is sometimes the most decent thing a person can do." Renee nodded. She stood there another moment. Then she went back to the bar, picked up her bag, left 3 times her usual tip for the bartender, and walked out into the October afternoon. Tobias went to the kitchen. He came back 12 minutes later with a tray, she-crab soup, smothered pork chop with grits. Sweet tea, a small dish of cornbread that hadn't been on the original order. He set it all down with both hands. Carefully. The way you set something down when you want the act of setting it down to mean something. Dorothy looked at the food. She looked at Tobias. She looked at her son across the table. She closed her eyes. She said grace, the same 12 words, the same lips barely moving. Then she opened her eyes and picked up her spoon. She tasted the soup. She set the spoon down, and she smiled the real smile, the one that starts deep and moves upward until it reaches the eyes and stays there. James watched his mother eat. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were soft, and he did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the moment was not already saying better. 3 weeks passed. The world did not stop turning on the afternoon of that Tuesday in October. The lunch crowd at the Lantern House thinned and then rebuilt. The jazz quartet played their Friday set. The white tablecloths were laundered and reset, and the she-crab soup remained on the menu at $16, and the smothered pork chop with grits remained at $38. From the outside, the restaurant looked exactly as it always had. But the entrance looked different. Between the framed James Beard nomination letter and the review from the Savannah Morning News, Owen Marsh had hung a photograph in a simple dark wood frame. 31 children on gymnasium bleachers. Telfair Academy, 1974. At the far left of the middle row, a young woman in a blue dress. Below the frame, a small brass plate with a single line of text. The people who built this city look like every kind of person. The hostess on the Monday morning after it went up stopped in front of it before her shift started. She looked at it for a long time. She didn't say anything to anyone. She just looked at it, and then she went to the host stand, and she did her job differently that day. Subtly differently. In ways that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't been watching closely. But Tobias noticed, and Owen noticed, and that was enough. Kayla Briggs completed her 30 days. It was not easy. The first week was the hardest, walking into the restaurant each morning, knowing that every person on staff had witnessed what she had done, knowing that the story had moved through the dining room and out into the city the way stories move in a place like Savannah, where everyone knows someone who was there or knows someone who knows someone. She greeted every guest the same. She did not assess. She did not calculate. She looked at the door, and she looked at the person coming through it, and she said, "Good morning" or "Good afternoon," and she meant it, or she made herself mean it, and by the third week she noticed she no longer had to make herself. On a Saturday in November, she brought her son in for lunch. His name was Caleb. 7 years old, 2 front teeth, missing the particular energy of a child who treats every new room as a room that was built specifically for his exploration. She sat him at the corner table near the kitchen hallway. He looked around the restaurant with enormous interest. He looked at the photograph in the entrance for a long time. "Who are those kids?" he asked. "Students," Kayla said. "From a long time ago. What happened to them?" "They grew up," Kayla said. "They built things." Caleb considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then he picked up the menu and studied it with great concentration. Dorothy came in that same Saturday morning, 2 hours before Kayla and her son arrived. She came alone, canvas bag over her shoulder, the birthday card for Amara, long since delivered, a new paperback novel in the bag's interior pocket. She walked through the front door, and she stopped for a moment in front of the photograph. She looked at the 22-year-old woman in the blue dress. She looked at the 31 children on the bleachers. She smiled. Kayla was at the host stand. She saw Dorothy come in. She did not pause. She did not assess. She picked up a menu and she came around the stand and she said, "Good morning, Mrs. Washington. Your usual table." Dorothy looked at her. Not the long, searching look of someone checking for sincerity. Just a look. Clear and direct and brief. "Good morning," Dorothy said. She followed Kayla to the corner table near the kitchen hallway. She sat down. She set her canvas bag on the chair beside her. She put on her reading glasses, and she opened her novel, and she waited for the food that smelled even now like something she had been following her whole life. Tobias Green started his city apprenticeship in January. His first rotation was events management, specifically the logistics coordination for Savannah's annual Heritage Dinner held every February at the Savannah Civic Center, attended by 800 people, and chaired for the 11th consecutive year by Dorothy Mae Washington. He arrived for their first planning meeting carrying a yellow legal pad and a pen, and the expression of someone who has been preparing for this moment, without knowing it was this moment they were preparing for. Dorothy shook his hand at the door of the conference room. She looked at the legal pad. "You still take notes by hand," she said. "Old habit," Tobias said. "My grandmother said if you write it down, you remember it." "Your grandmother was right," Dorothy said. "Sit down. We have work to do." Sandra Perch completed the Cultural Competency Program in December. She returned to the Lantern House on a Monday in January as floor manager. Same title, restructured responsibilities, the specific discomfort of a person who is not yet finished becoming someone different, but has stopped being able to pretend they are the same. She was harder to read than she used to be, less certain. That uncertainty Owen privately believed was the most honest thing she had ever brought to work. Owen Marsh revised the staff training manual over the course of 3 weekends in November. He rewrote the section on guest reception from scratch. The new first page contained one sentence printed in the same font as the menu centered on the page. "Nothing else. Every person who walks through this door deserves to finish their meal." Renee Fontaine never told anyone what she saw that Tuesday in October. She started volunteering at the Bull Street Literacy Program in November Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, the same sessions Dorothy ran. She filed paperwork, organized reading materials, made coffee, did whatever was needed. Dorothy saw her name on the volunteer list the first week and said nothing. She assigned Renee to the Tuesday group, the one with the most challenging readers, the one that required the most patience. Renee never missed a session. There is a thing that happens in a room when ordinary cruelty is met not with rage, but with something harder to answer, with patience, with clarity, with the refusal to become what has been done to you. It changes the room. Not all at once, not completely, not in every person equally, but it changes it. The change moves outward from the center, the way warmth moves from a single lit candle in a dark space, slowly, imperfectly, but persistently touching everything within reach. Dorothy Mae Washington did not go to the Lantern House that Tuesday in October to change a room. She went because she was tired and the food smelled good. She changed the room anyway, because that is what happens when you put 72 years of dignity into a space that tried to make you small. The dignity doesn't shrink to fit. The room expands to hold it. That is the only thing that has ever worked. The only thing that has ever in the long run actually worked. Some people walk into a room and are immediately told in 100 small and large ways that the room was not built for them. Dorothy Mae Washington had been walking into those rooms her entire life. She never stopped walking in. She never became the cruelty that greeted her. She finished her meal when they let her. And when they didn't, she waited with the patience of someone who knows that dignity is not something a room can take from you. It is something you carry in and carry out every single time. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what Dorothy's story made you feel. And if you're not part of this community yet, subscribe. Because the next person who walks through that door has a story too, and it deserves to be told.